For this evening's class, props wise, I've got a block, 2 bricks would be useful, and a bolster. You may or may not use all of them. You might prefer to use one rather than another at any point in time. We'll start by just letting ourselves settle our breath a little bit. If you're able to sit down on the floor, great. If you're able to sit down on the block, great. If you are struggling with that, then maybe sitting on top of the bolster. It could be a rolled up blanket as well. If you're on the bolster, then see if you can kind of bring the knees together a little bit more and allow yourself to cross the legs at the shins with the front shin to your mat, kind of just following the line of that. So you're beginning to rotate the hips out a little bit and let yourself wriggle around on that bolster. They're a bit like bean bags. Sometimes you have to kind of wriggle around and find that nice, easy, even place for you to be. And then we can simply put the hands onto the thighs. If you're on the block, you can bring the heels right into the groins and let the shins come down to the floor in more sort of traditional Sukhasana type pose. But we're going to lift the body up, relax the shoulders, consider the position of your head. So if your postural habit has been to kind of hunch a little bit, now is a time to try and work in that middle upper back area and lift it up towards the sky and lengthen it out, which in itself might take some time for those muscles to release. With the space that we've made on the front side of the body, we can now breathe into the belly, nice and low, and let the breath ease its way up into the chest, expanding the ribs and moving in towards the collarbones. That's the sensation. Physically, that's not quite what happens inside the body, but that's how it feels. And seeing if you can get used to the idea of letting your belly expand from the ground up. Quite often in the Western world, we're somewhat intense about keeping our belly drawn in and making our waist look as small as we can. Stretchy elastic trousers are the answer to this conundrum in the yogic world. It allows you to move easily and freely with your breath. And slowing the breath right down for the inhale and the exhale, lower our blood pressure a little. Allow our racing mind to slow down a little. So maybe the mind and the breath begin to mirror each other. And perhaps a sense of serenity coming into the whole of the body. Or towards that direction. Slowly move from there and come a little lower. So I'll take the block and just put that in front of the bolster and shift down. Now, if you find that, again, as I said, a little bit troublesome, allow yourself to stay high. You can do this next pose in either position. It's just a little easier to see what's going on if I lower myself. Bring the hands on to the front of the knees, and we're just going to sort of churn the spine around a little bit in the pelvis. So I'm going to lean out to one side and forwards, a little bit back, and roll around. Now, ideally, I want to see if I can exhale on the way back, inhale out to the sides and forwards. So the speed of my breath is going to govern to some degree the speed of the rotation. And just allowing the hips, the groins, and hip flexors, and that lower spine to just free up a little bit. Nothing excessive. I'll even start to rotate in the opposite direction. And you'll notice perhaps that keeping the arms relatively straight. So trying to work into the shoulders, allow them to move around as much as possible. Getting a little bit of sort of massage and stretch into the top of the shoulders and into the shoulder joints and the muscles underneath the shoulder blades. And you can change direction again if you feel that's a good thing to do. You could even uncross the legs and cross them the opposite way around if that felt natural as well. I'm going to move slowly from here into child's pose. I'll lift the knees up. You can use the hands, stretch the legs out to say hello to the back of your knees as you let the blood supply come back in. Now, in the child's pose, we'll take the knees wide and the heels together and allow ourselves to sit down. You could bring the block underneath the forehead if your head doesn't touch the ground easily. You could also roll that bolster directly a long ways underneath your body and allow yourself to sit down onto that, so resting the whole of your body. Or if you're able to, you can bring your hands underneath your forehead and just allow yourself to ease down and breathe in gently. Although there's plenty of room for the diaphragm to expand, perhaps becomes more apparent that your breath is moving into the side of the ribs as well. And if you've got a little bit of a stiff back, or stiff hips, you actually might find that not only are you feeling the stretch in the hips, but also you're noticing the stretch in your lower back as well. And let ourselves lift up from there. Come back up onto all fours. We're going to make our way onto our backs. Now I'm going to keep the head the same end, front end of the mat. And I'm going to take the flat block and just place it underneath the back of my head. It's going to come into a happy baby. I want to try and keep the shoulders flat to the floor and the tailbone attached as well. So you bring one leg in at a time, keeping the knees wide, and just let them sink down. And then allow myself to lift the legs up. So let's start with the hands around the back of the thighs. Draw the knees towards me, and then transfer the hands to the shins in front, so the arms are now on the inside, and to see where it's easy for you to be. So it may be that if your body is a little tight, that just holding on to the sort of top of the ankles is going to be the place to be. That way you can keep your spine very flat to the ground. You've got all of the natural weight of your legs drawing your hips into an opening position. The shoulders are relaxed as well. If it's easy for you to reach your fingertips around the edge of your little toe and hold on to the edge of your foot, you can do. It requires a slightly stronger grip in the fingers so they can fatigue quite quickly. And since we're holding this for a minute or two, it might be that actually holding onto the ankles is easier on the hands. Feet ideally would be directly over the knees, and the knees are as wide apart as we can make. Ease our way out of that, just bringing the feet gently back down to the floor. Now we're going to come into a posture called a resting Buddha. So I'm going to roll onto my right side here. Just lift up gently and move the block out of the way. And I'm going to bring my bolster, which could be a rolled up blanket, and place that close to my body across the mat. Now I want that to be close to my hip. So as I roll over, it's pressing into the sort of fleshy bit between the top of my hip and the bottom of my rib. Now, if I find that that is too extreme in terms of how that feels in my lower back and my spine, then you could take the block out and do this lying flat to the floor. You take the feet out a little bit further away from the body, but keeping the knees bent. Gradually let myself sink my head onto that lower arm. Move the top hand onto the top hip and then take that up towards the sky and slowly reach it out. Place palm on top of palm with the arms as straight as I can make them. I want to be careful that I don't roll backwards or forwards into the pose. I want to try to keep the body vertical to the floor. So side up. The plate or the object that you lay over is not that important. Just the opening of the ribs to the side, the top rib, stretching the bottom pelvis away from the hips. So you're just increasing the distance between the hips and the hips. In a controlled way. And some of the differences between being able to use a bolster and not might be how new your bolster is, how smoggy it is, how those beams move around. It might be the fact that you have a small gap between the top of your hip and the bottom of your ribs. If you're under 5 feet tall, you'd probably find it very difficult to work with a bolster. You're 6'5", there's a good chance you've got a long trunk, and you might find it relatively easy. The top arm, in front of the chest, press down lightly, allow myself to lift up. For my ability to be able to see the screen and for you to be able to see me, I'm going to change ends, but you could have just rolled over and done the pose on the opposite side of your body. But if you're with me, then just easing your way down, getting that bolster nice and tight into the hip, sliding the arm out, and the head come down. One leg on top of the other, so the heels are more or less lining up with the spine, and then that top arm lifts up and extends out and over. And then you might find this different from one side of the body to the other. Just might feel like a bigger or lesser stretch. Might feel a little more natural to lean out one way than the other. We'll slowly bring that top arm again in front of the body. Press away from the floor and ease our way back up. It might take a moment or two for your body to kind of acclimatize being back to normal position for the spine. We're going to come into a supported bridge pose. So if your spine and your neck are a little bit sore or have issues, then roll down onto your side and then come onto your back that way and have the bolster close by. You could use the two bricks, one on top of the other, and place them underneath the back of the pelvis as well. Then I use my hands to roll the spine very gently to the floor. And as my head comes to the ground, I'm going to take a little breath. And just press the feet into the floor and let the hips lift up towards the sky. And we'll see if I can shimmy the bolster underneath my body so that it is under my pelvis and not pressing into my spine. I'm a fairly tall chap, so this feels like a very comfortable position for me to be in terms of the curvature of the spine. If it feels unnatural, uncomfortable, doesn't feel like it's a warming place to be, then you need to lower your height of your props a little. So if you're using the bricks, you could easily take one brick out, supplement a brick and a block, or just one brick, or even the block. Once you've arrived, allow the hands to come up to the side of the mat, palms face up, and allow your feet to walk out wider than your shoulders, and then see if you can allow your knees to sink towards the center line. Now they may or may not touch, but the movement of that rotation hopefully will just allow a little bit of ease to come into the top of the hip, the front of the pelvis, which is where that hip flexor group of muscles tend to stagnate. As the time moves by and your breath softens, your body becomes more accepting of the position it's in, you may find that your spine wants to sink down to the floor. See if you can let that actually occur. It takes a little bit of confidence and courage to let a spine that is, if it's particularly sore spine, to relax, because obviously it doesn't want to get hurt again, so it's going to hold that tension to protect itself. But that tension itself is creating a lot of fatigue. And the spine, unless you have some really serious issues with it, is only going to go as far as it's safe for your spine to go. You don't have to do anything other than just breathe and be in the pose. The body will allow the rest of it to happen. If you're able to start to feel that sense of relaxation in the lower back and across the belly, you might notice that your shoulders are a bit tight as well. And when you're able to release the hips, the shoulders tend to soften as a byproduct, since they mirror each other in terms of holding tension. So if one is relaxed, the other is relaxed, and vice versa. I'm going to take some deeper breaths. Start to press the feet slowly into the floor. You feel the muscles in the legs start to engage. You feel that around your glutes, your bottom muscles. You feel the belly tighten a little bit. Gradually, you're able to micro lift the hips. So you can take the full weight and then just use your hands to slide the bolster out. Now see if you can take a breath or two or three to lower your hips back down to the ground so you get a sense of each vertebrae in the back coming into contact with the ground and gently curling the spine out. You'll also notice that the spine feels like it's a lot further away from the floor than you remember it being. If that's the case, then your spine has released and lengthened a little bit, which is all good. And then we're down to the ground. Now take a little breath from there. Allow ourselves to roll the legs over to the right side. Use the hands again to press into the floor. And lift our elbows slowly back up to a seated posture. Now I'm just going to bring the soles of the feet together and let the knees hang out to the side. I'm going to wriggle a little bit onto the front edge of the sitting bones and come into butterfly pose. So I'm going to have the hands out in front on the shins. Try not to bear too much weight down in the legs. So close in towards the ankles. Going to slowly allow the spine to round and let the chin drop very carefully in towards the chest. And then just see where the body naturally goes. So some people, it's going to go forwards a long way. Some people, it will just round a little bit and you'll be quite high. So anything from almost sitting upright and just nodding your head forwards to having your chest on the ground, and anywhere in between is going to be natural. So allow yourself to embrace that and enjoy it. And you might feel the intensity of the stretch evenly down the spine and through the neck, down into the tailbone, into the legs. Or it might have some intensity that is greater in some parts of the body than others. We're sitting still and just breathing, and letting our body weight do the rest. Use the hands to press and lift ourselves back up slowly. And we're going to use the hands to draw the legs back together again and just lengthen them out. See how they feel. Now, from that forward bended position, the blood would have kind of accumulated in your head a little. You might feel a little bit of a rush as it comes back down as you sit upright. When you feel ready in your own time, we'll just swing the feet out to the side and come up onto the hands and knees again at the front of the mat. I'm going to come into a lunge, and I'm going to have the block out to one side. I'll take the 2 bricks to the front of the mat, about shoulder distance apart, and I've got the bolster to the side of the mat within reach as well. So I'm set up for not only this pose, but the poses that come afterwards. I'm going to take a little breath and just draw my right foot forwards until my knee is over my ankle. I'm going to try and keep the hands on the floor, tuck the toe on the back foot, and just walk the knee as far away as I can, keeping the front knee over the ankle. Once I've gone as far as I can, I'm going to untuck toes and let that settle. And I'm going to bring the bricks back in, more or less underneath where I think my shoulders will be. So I can use my hands to press and lift up. So it's a little bit easier on the wrists. And I'm able to let the body weight sink down into the hips a little bit. And the knee may well travel forwards a little bit. That's not a problem. In this style of yoga, it's not a problem. Head position is one of choice, personal choice. You can let it drop, or you can have the head held. Really just feel where it feels most comfortable. And that's probably your more natural positioning of your head in relationship to your spine. So if you do a lot of desk work, there's a good chance your chin will want to drop down. There's plenty of room for the breath in the belly. I'm still trying to draw that from low down. And feel and experience that moving through the body. I'm going to see if I can smooth the bricks out, bring the hands down to the floor. Ease my way back onto all fours. So a certain amount of moving around and rearranging the body parts. And taking a moment or two just in this very sort of neutral position with the shoulders over the wrists and knees underneath the hips. The belly drawn in a little so the spine doesn't sag down. I want to try and keep it long. And gradually wait for my hips to feel like they've come back into some kind of symmetry. The feeling of the deep stretch just starts to fade away a little bit. And when you feel comfortable, we'll bring the other leg forwards. I'm starting to feel just about right. If you need a little bit longer, don't feel that you have to move just because I am. Again, we can take one leg forwards, allow ourselves to just tuck the toes on the back leg and walk the knee as far back as you can. And then let yourself sink down and bring the blocks back under the body. Allow yourself to lift. That may feel identical to the previous side, but it might feel very different. You might not be able to get to the same position. As long as you feel that you're going as far as you can safely, you're able to breathe easily, and you're able to maintain the structure of the pose to some degree, then allow yourself to stay. Then we can look to moving ourselves out of the pose again. So back onto all fours. Stretch the legs out gently. Allow your body to come back to feeling normal. Now for the next version, I'm going to use the bolster, but if you don't have a bolster, you could use the bricks to supplement just lifting the body a little away from the floor. I'm going to take my right foot to the outside edge of the mat and then bring the bolster underneath my body so that I can bring my forearms and my elbows down to rest on that. Again, I'm going to move the back knee as far away as I can, just let the hips sink down. And the nice thing about the bolster is that it's easy to roll around to get it into the right place, which might be a bit further forward than you thought it was going to be. The blocks are a little bit more tricky to work with. Now, I'm making no attempt to control where my body goes to. I'm just letting it sink. It feels quite natural for my right leg to hang out to the side and sort of gradually roll into the side edge of the foot. My back knee is a little bit tender at the moment in this posture, even though I've got two mats underneath me. So keeping the toes tucked underneath, it just keeps my patella in a little bit of a better place. So it's a little more comfortable for me. Again, head position entirely of choice. Let us all lift out of that. Again, a little time to shake out the legs. Then move the bolster just off to the side a little bit so that it's easy to bring that left leg through. So taking the bolster out to the right side in this case. Now the hips feel relatively released. I'll take the left foot forwards. Again, just a little off of the mat, toes out to the side. I'll bring the bolster underneath again so I can see where I'm going to aim up to be. I can move the back leg as far away as I comfortably can. And then bring myself gently down onto the bolster. Now, for me, this pose feels significantly different from side to side. I'm reasonably sure that's because of the discrepancies between the positioning of the hip sockets, the depth, and the size of the femur heads from side to side of my body, which is pretty natural for most bodies to be like that. I certainly feel very aware of it being different this side to the previous side. In terms of the overall effect and comfort, it's very similar. A sense of deep stretch. But just the positioning of the body, the degree of lean of the leg out to the side will feel very, very different. We've got about half a minute to go. And we'll start to bring ourselves back up. Now we're going to be moving next into a yogic squat. And you could use the bolster behind if you wanted to. I'm actually going to use a brick and a block. So I'm going to lean back onto the heels, toes are tucked under, and you'll see that I've put the brick on top of the block. At the moment it's running north to south on the map, but I'm going to take it behind so it goes east to west. Hands on the ground, tuck the toes underneath. I'm going to roll the knees away from the ground and bring the heels onto the block. But I'm also going to have the brick there, see if I can sit down on the brick. Now you could keep your heels on the block if that felt good to you, or you could just move your feet off a little bit. But it changes the angle and the stress feeling through the ankle joint. So you want it to be feeling something, but not so intense that it's making your eyes water or you're having to hold your breath to work your way through it. It should feel quite natural. The other thing that's important with this is that you could have your feet parallel and the knees pointing out. You have the feet and the knees pointing out. You have the knees and the feet pointing forwards. Whatever feels right in your hips, your spine, etc. You might even want to, if your feet are then on the ground, move them a little further apart when the block is wide. We are going to see if we can just rest the arms on top of the knees. Allow ourselves to lift the spine gently up out of the pelvis. We're looking to relax the shoulders and lengthen the spine. Allow the pelvis to move into a neutral plane with regard to the floor. So it's not tilting forwards or backwards or either side to side. And we're just sitting on the sitting bones. Now you could take the brick out and allow yourself to be in fresh air as well. So this is a slightly gentler version where you don't need to be considering the balance too much. It's relatively easy to sit on top of the sitting bones. I should have perhaps mentioned before we started that it's quite a long squat. You might have made a choice that you're starting to regret. If that is the case, by all means, allow yourself to move out and move into a more comfortable version if that's happened. Now we begin to come out of this. So you could just move to the side. You could take fingers out in front, lean forwards a little bit. I'm going to move the brick out to the side and then allow myself to sit down on the block and take the legs out in front. Now you may have mimicked the way that I moved through that, and you may have found your own way. But ultimately, we will end up sitting on top of the block with the legs out in front and the spine nice and tall. We'll take the left foot underneath the right leg and take the foot out towards the outside of the right hip. So hopefully that my left knee is now pointing forwards and the shin is on the floor. I'm going to wrap the right leg over the top, and rather than worrying about rotating around too much, I'm going to see if I could hook my elbow around the knee and draw the knee towards me and allow myself to kind of lift my chest up. I may tilt the pelvis forwards a little bit as well. You might want to just fold your arms, hold onto your elbows. Maybe that's an easy way to sort of structure the shoulders. But that gentle hug in hopefully creates a little bit of warmth down that outside edge of the IT band, and just stretches into the hip a little bit. And then I'm going to release from there. And lengthen the legs out and just do exactly the same, but to the opposite side. So you do need to draw that foot in quite close towards the body. I use my hands to sort of manipulate it in a little bit. Sit up nice and tall. Wrap the arm around the outside of the leg and then just squeeze that in a little bit. Providing the stretch feeling is to the outside edge of the hip, running down that IT band, from your sort of outer hip down to the outside edge of your knee, then you're doing fine to hold yourself in a position. If you're finding the stretch response or the heat positioning is more in the groin, then be very careful how much effort you put into holding this knee in towards the body. You might even need to just sort of cup the hands around and just take it to a little point where you don't feel it on the inside of the groin, but you can feel it on the outside. Making an assumption that you're tight in the outside edge of the hip in the first place, and maybe that's not the case. You might not be able to find it at all. But if you're finding the sort of heat generated in the inside of the groin, there's a possibility that you're actually pressing the leg bone against the pelvis. So obviously you don't want to pull on that excessively. You want to be able to open the joint a little bit in the hip and stretch the IT band, but you don't want to overdo it. Almost there, got a few more breaths to take on this side. And then we'll take a spinal twist. And I'll release from there, untangle the legs. And to simply shimmy the body forwards, and have the block towards the back of the mat to place underneath my head. Keeps it easy. Again, think about your spine, how it feels. Do you need to roll onto your side and then onto your back? Is that a safer way for you to move into the pose? Once you're down on the ground, I'm going to walk the toes in towards the center line. Wiggle the shoulders and the hips to allow yourself to really lengthen and flatten the spine as much as you can. And then bring the hands out in line with the chest. Now, although I'm saying in line with the chest, quite often on the mats, you see people with their hands are actually higher than the top of their head. And if you like that as a position, you're actually shrugging your shoulders up unintentionally. And you're going to find it difficult to relax, and bringing them back down so they're more in line with the nipple line of the chest is what we're looking for. I'm going to shimmy the hips gently over towards the left side of my body and allow the legs to roll slowly down towards the right. And I'll try and let the bottom legs sink down to the ground gradually. Give it a little bit of time. You could, if you wished, if it feels comfortable, turn the head the opposite side to the legs, over towards the left. Again, it's one of those poses that if you move the neck and then find it's uncomfortable, just bring yourself back. Slowly lift the legs back up. Move the hips over to the opposite side and let them come down over towards the left. Carefully lift ourselves back up, just to realign the spine, and then roll to whichever side you find it easier to lift your body from the floor. I'm going to build myself a little ramp. So I'm going to use the block back of the mat, and I'm going to use the brick as well. So I'm going to place one brick east to west, one block on top, making it a little bit of a raised angle for me. And then zip side down, bolster goes on top, running north to south on the mat. And just make sure that the bolster is not hanging over the edge, and then give your bolster edge that's closest to you a little bit of a tap, and kind of move the beams around and flatten some of the roundness out of that to start with. And you want to have the center line of the bolster and your hip bone directly in line with each other, and about a hand's distance between the bolster and your hip. I'll start to turn my body towards the bolster and bend the bottom leg so I get a 90-degree angle between the bolster at the top of the thigh, and the shin is running down the line of the mat, toes out to the side. So bring the hands a little bit closer in towards facing the bolster. I'm going to swing the top leg and bring the thigh along the center line of the mat, again with a 90-degree bend. So toes on that foot are pointing down towards the bottom of the mat. Allow the chest to ease in, and then just turn the head. So I'm sitting a little bit sort of offset, but I'm trying to gradually let the chest roll down into the bolster. And the only thing is that lying on top of your ear, if you happen to be deaf in your top ear, it could be a little bit tricky. You might need to keep your eyes open and looking at the screen to know when to come out. I'm going to stay here for a couple of minutes and just let ourselves melt into the bolster. It feels like a strange position to be in to start with if you're not familiar with it. But gradually you're able to let the shoulders relax and the ribs, and you realize you can melt quite comfortably into that bolster beneath you. Now I'm going to just draw the hands a little closer. On the exhale, allow myself to lift up. Now you could roll into the second side, keeping the bolster the same end of the mat. Again, just so that I can keep a little bit of an eye on the time, which is overrunning already, or just about to. We don't want it to go too far. I'm going to move the equipment to the opposite end, and then just allow myself to come into the second side. So again, at hands distance, lining up, allow myself to roll the chest in 90 degrees, swing the top leg out so that line of the thigh follows the center line of the mat, and then ease the chest down in your own time. And we'll bring the hands to the ground. Let ourselves lift slowly back up and come into a seated posture of choice. So using the props as you feel works best for you, or no props at all. So to sit up nice and tall. And bring hands in towards the heart to close our practice. First of all, we'll close the eyes as we take a longer breath in. And simply exhaling gently, letting the chin drop. Letting that little bow come into the spine to seal the practice. We'll take the breath back in and let that naturally build the spine for us, lifting the head and opening the eyes. Namaste. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. Hope you enjoyed, and see you on the mat again soon.